From the studios of Foxboro Cable Access, located in the center of Foxborough, Massachusetts, you are watching Around Foxborough.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Around Foxborough. I'm your host, Jared Craig, and I'm joined here this week by Sagamore Ferris Gray of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. So thanks so much for being here, Ferris. I really appreciate you lending your voice to this conversation. It's a debate we're having around town right now is about our mascot and should it change? Does it honor Native people? Is it historically insensitive to use it? First, I'd love to hear a little bit about you before we talk about that. You are Sagamore. Could you tell us what that means and maybe what the Massachusetts tribe is and what they do?
Sure, thank you. I'm Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog, like you said. Sagamore is basically a war chief. Responsibilities include education, protection of our territory, and protection of our culture. So it's a title. Some people think it's a name, but it's a title.
Mm-hmm. So you are the Sagamore, you are Sagamore? Which
Correct.
One? Okay.
I'm the Sagamore
Great.
of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog.
And you say war chief. Does that mean that you're actively battling? How does that, in today's terms, translate?
Traditionally, yes. That would mean that I am the protector of the tribe and the lead of the warriors, basically. In contemporary times, there's no real wars to be fought as we think of them, but when you're trying to protect land from being developed, that's kind of like a war. And so, yeah, that is a war. We're battling against developers or trying to save ceremonial landscapes, some of our ceremonial landscapes. That's a battle. And we meet hostilities and indigenous mascots in some cities and towns is pretty hostile, so that's a battle as well.
Sure. So as I said before, our town is having this debate about potentially changing the mascot right now. We're the Foxborough Warriors, and we use right now the Redskins logo, which has been banned in the NFL, but we're still using it as of today. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, if you've talked to other towns about this, and why this is an important issue to you?
Well, first of all, mascots, we understand how people get attached to mascots. We can understand that because it represents their school and who they are, and they built in their childhood, they build their identity based on that mascot. So we do understand why, some towns or some individuals.
There's a nostalgia factor.
Right. They don't want it to change. But I mean, basically, if you understand the history of what happened to the indigenous people here, some people think they know what happened. People will say to me, it's messed up how we took all your land, but it's not even that simple. When the settlers first came here and colonized these lands, it wasn't just land they took. They took everything. They took our children. They took our life, our culture, our food. They took our identity. They took everything that we had. And they assimilated us. And so in genocide, our women were raped. It was an ugly time. And these things aren't taught in school, but it's part of the history. This is the things that the colonists did to the indigenous people, not just here in the Commonwealth, but across basically North and South America. But here, specifically in the Commonwealth, it was my people. We were the first to die from the plagues. And 90% of our population died, 90%. And we can kind of understand that now with COVID, how scared everyone was during the height of COVID and how uncertain we were, how afraid we were to our families. Pretty much the whole country was locked down, everything stopped. And the survival rate was a lot better than the plagues that my ancestors faced. 90% of us, it was a 90% kill rate. And so 90% of us died. And indigenous people don't think that was an accident, two cultures just coming into first contact, because it wasn't first contact. We'd been trading with the colonists or the Europeans for at least 100 years before they settled here. So it's rather ironic that right before they chose to settle or send settlers here, that the plagues hit and wiped out 90% of us, pretty much cleared the land of all the indigenous people, so they would meet no resistance. So that's how it began for us. And then as more and more colonists came, they just started pushing us back. They cut us off from the sea early on, our primary food source in the summer. We were isolated to what they would name praying towns. And the praying towns were the center of assimilation. We were forced assimilated to Christianity. It was basically for our ancestors.
You're saying that your people were pushed to certain towns that became praying towns to try to assimilate?
We were isolated in our villages, some of our villages.
Okay.
And these villages became praying towns. And
to try to convert?
It wasn't trying, it was forced assimilation. It was basically assimilate or death.
Sure.
You either assimilate to Christianity or you die. And here in the Commonwealth, the only indigenous people that survived were the ones that were isolated in these praying towns. And so that's the beginning of colonization. It was a very ugly thing. And so a once proud people like the Massachusetts, a once numerous people, were just a shell of themselves now. And the survivors were forced to assimilate to this European culture.
Well, sure. Couldn't you also then make the argument that, using native iconography, using even a tomahawk or like a headdress in our town would then be honoring those people who, against their will, made a sacrifice, an ultimate sacrifice? Or you don't see it that way, and why not?
I mean, you can make the comparison that if somebody killed your child, murdered your child, and then they're going to start, using your child, saying, "Hey, I'm going to honor your child by just having this picture up here." They're going to say, "You can't speak my child's name," And the truth is, for 400 years, we couldn't be ourselves. We couldn't be indigenous people. We were forbidden to speak our language. We were forbidden to dress in our traditional dress. We're forbidden to do anything that was indigenous. And you fast forward to today, and now, we can't be indigenous, but now our colonizers can play like they're indigenous. For us, it's the colonizers or the settlers using the indigenous people as a trophy. Look at the savage that we conquered. That's how it feels to us.
That's how it feels to
That's
me.
how it feels to us. And a lot of times in these schools, what happens during pep rallies, we're mocked. Our whole culture is being assimilated by the descendants of the colonizers. They're acting like they're us. They're making racial slurs. Like maybe in Foxborough, maybe that Foxborough High School, maybe they're not making the racial slurs. But what about the teams they play against? They're not saying, "Oh, let's go scalp the Indian." They're not saying these racial slurs. Foxborough has no control over other schools and what their students say. But what they're actually doing is they're creating an environment for this kind of racism, and they're not seeing that. The school system's creating an environment for racism, and they're not understanding the depth of what they're doing. And so hopefully, we're talking to indigenous people, they can better understand where the indigenous people are coming from and why it's a huge problem for us to be used as mascots.
I think you're putting a fine point on the thing that makes me uneasy about this whole thing is that we can say as a town, that we want to honor your people, and that's why we're doing it. But we're going to be playing the Bears, who are going to say, beat the Warriors, crush the Warriors, kill the Warriors, and yeah, we can say as a town and agree that we're trying to do it in a respectful way. Maybe you're being successful or not, but that doesn't change the fact that other towns are going to perceive us in a way that we can't control, or on a battlefield of sport, attack us in a way that is acceptable, right? It is interesting. I think you also mentioned something earlier about the play like indigenous, that someone, Pat the Patriot for the New England Patriots, gets dressed up in a Patriot costume as a person representing that. That's part of doing it, right? If you're a Wildcat, you're gonna dress up as a Wildcat. Can you talk a little bit about how playing indigenous, that I think that was the phrase you used, playing like you're indigenous, hurts your tribe, your people?
Well, it doesn't only hurt my people, it hurts all indigenous people, children, and it hurts non-indigenous people as well, because this is learned behavior of where they can kind of mock cultures. Like they'll just hoop and holler, like that's what indigenous people did, the hoop and holler. We had a beautiful spoken language that we were forbidden to speak. But then when somebody's playing like they're indigenous, they're mocking it like it's a joke, like it's funny. You know, there's no other culture that's going to be mocked like that, or it's accepted that they're mocked like that, especially what we've been through at the hands of the settlers. You know, there was really bad, nasty things that happened to my ancestors, continues to happen today. That's why I'm here. And so, you know, what we're asking is for some empathy and some understanding of what happened here and what happened to the indigenous people here. You know, I heard it once said that the Massachusetts disappeared before much could be recorded about them. Well, we didn't disappear. It wasn't like 1 second you were here and then they vanished. We were murdered, we were killed, we were assimilated. So we didn't disappear. And that not only happened to the Massachusetts people, that happened to all the indigenous people. And, you know, finally, like we're having this discussion now, and there was a time where we wouldn't even be able to have this discussion. We'd just be silenced, we'd have no voice. So I thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for being here. I think it's an important conversation to have. Absolutely, because I feel like one of the arguments is always that like it's a group of people being offended on behalf of another group of people. Like it's not your culture. Don't be offended by that. But this is your culture. This is you saying that to us. So I guess I've heard that you've consulted with other schools or towns about this. How has that conversation gone? And has everyone been receptive to your message? Have some people resisted it? And what has your experience been?
Every town is different. City or town is different. Sure. I mean, now in the place we are today, with both our cultures, there is more understanding than there's ever been in the past. Some towns are like, oh, we didn't realize all this, we're gonna change it. And their school committee votes to change it. You know, other towns are like, you know, we'll get rid of the imagery, we'll keep the name, you know, kind of a 50-50 thing. And some towns are just straight up like, we're not changing it. This is us. We are the warriors. That's who we are. And it's really important to know. There's some really important facts about the Massachusetts that people need to know. And this is what I do when I go to different school committees or different towns and talk to them about their mascot. Like they're calling like me a warrior basically, which, you know, I am a warrior, but that's not my life. And that's not all indigenous people. So we're being classified as warriors, right? Now, there's a fact that if we were a warrior class culture, society, there'd be no colonists here today because we would have killed them all. That's not who we were. The Massachusetts were primarily fishers and farmers, fishermen and farmers. That's what we did. Matter of fact, the French recorded something about the Massachusetts early on before colonization when they were coming here trading. The French recorded, Champlain recorded that the French, that they weren't going to trade with the Massachusetts because we dedicated too much time to fishing and farming. Because that's what we did here. When the colonists came to our territory, to these shores, they landed in a breadbasket. There were Massachusetts planting fields everywhere. That's who we were. That's how we sustained our people, with the ocean and growing food. And so I don't see like Foxboro farmers, that sounds pretty good. If they want to honor indigenous people, honor the Massachusetts. But we weren't just warriors. We went to war when we had to protect our resources. We're astronomers, you know, we're philosophers. We were all these things as well, but we're being classified as warriors. Look at the brave warriors. You know, they're really classifying us just in an isolated role of being a warlike people, when really that's not who we were.
What I'm hearing you say is like honor the artistry of your ancestors, not necessarily the war.
Right. Well, they're just seeing what they want to see. Oh, the brave Indians! You guys were so brave. You fought. Right? Yeah, we were killed. You know, we were fighting for our freedom. We were fighting for our survival. We were being invaded. And just think of yourself and your families right now. Like, what if the United States got invaded right now? And what if your invaders try to change everything about you, murdered your women, murdered your children, all the nastiest things of humanity? How are you going to feel about your invader? You know, say 100 years after that, and then they use your child as a mascot, your descendants will go crazy. You know, and I just think there's so little understanding for what happened here. Some people think they're honoring the indigenous people by using us as their mascot. But there's a lot of ways to honor us. You can give us land. Give us our land back if you want to honor us. Teach our history, our true history of what happened here in your schools if you want to honor us. There are so many ways to honor us. You don't honor us with a picture.
Well, 'cause I was going to say, too, one of the stories of Thanksgiving, right, is that the Pilgrims landed and couldn't farm, and indigenous people helped them farm and celebrated the bounty of the earth around Thanksgiving, right? Like that's what you were known for until when? Until that happens. Like when does the switch happen historically?
Well, the switch is right there, what you said, like even that whole, that's like mythology, that there was just this happy time that was happening. It wasn't a happy time. What preceded the Pilgrims landing, what preceded that is the plagues that wiped up that whole village that they decided to land on was wiped out by the plagues. He had one survivor. So right there, you have the people were killed right there. So that's how that story begins for the indigenous and the colonists, that they landed in a place that was devoid of any indigenous because they all died. There was one survivor, and he survived because he wasn't here. He was a prisoner of the Europeans at the time. And so that's how that story began. And this whole thing about there was this big unity from the beginning. That's not how it was at all. There was conflict almost immediately because the Pilgrims were desperate, searching for food. They were raiding food storages. They were doing all the things that people do when they're desperate. They weren't building a relationship at first. Like even with the Massachusetts, they were terrorized. The Pilgrims were literally terrorists to the Massachusetts. They terrorized the Massachusetts. But these stories aren't told. The true history of what happened here isn't taught. And it's up to people to do their own research until school systems start teaching an accurate history of what happened here. And I think if that was happening, we wouldn't be having this discussion about a mascot, because pretty much everyone would be able to see how inappropriate it is to have the survivors of this Holocaust that happened here as your mascot. There's no other race that would accept that.
All right, so to bring it back to the mascot debate a little bit, now that I kind of have an understanding, that I don't have the breadth, obviously, that you do. I think warrior as a term can mean a bunch of different things, but Foxborough sort of chosen to make it about natives. Would you, I guess I'm just looking for your personal opinion. If one of the scenarios that's been tossed out is keeping the name warrior and changing the native icons to something else, do you feel like that's a compromise? Does that go far enough in your?
Well, I mean, warriors is not a race. Warriors is not just one people. Warriors is just it's like a title, being a warrior. I mean, they can change their name, they can change the imagery to anything they want, but just don't use the indigenous people as someone who you're gonna choose to put on your shirts and then say, we're honoring you, because there's so many ways to honor us. There are some towns that, kept the name but changed the imagery. As long as, you're not calling yourselves us, because the truth is you're not us, we're still here. We're not people of the past, we're people of the present. We're still here, and these people are saying, please change your name, please change the imagery. I mean, that's what we're asking, And so you don't have to go back 10 minutes or 500 years to ask the indigenous people how they feel. We're saying right now that please change the name, please change the imagery. And Foxborough, they can make it a contest with their students to design something awesome, or make it a town-wide thing to design something, and they can make it a really awesome experience to rename the sports team. I mean, it can be a community thing. It doesn't have to be this negative thing to where we're changing history, because we're not changing history. We're changing the future and the path of this racism that we've been on for 400 years. That's what we're trying to change. We want people to understand that this is racism and it's unacceptable, and school committees should be on point with seeing how unacceptable this is.
So can I ask you to defend or denounce another argument I've heard, which is that our basketball team is the Boston Celtics, and that is meant to honor Irish people, and I'm from Irish heritage, and I'm not offended by the Boston Celtics. What is the difference between the Boston Celtics and the Foxborough Warriors?
Well, we're not a mythical creature. We're not a leprechaun. We're really here.
Yeah.
We're here right now. I'm not saying leprechauns never existed, because maybe they did. Maybe they still do, right? But there's no leprechauns walking around. I don't see any leprechauns walking around, So, I mean, that's their imagery, is a leprechaun, And we're still here, so we're saying that we're not mythical creatures, and we're not from the past.
Fair enough. You pointed out the ridiculousness of my question right away, so I'm sorry about that. But last sort of question I have on this topic is: there's talk that the state's going to change the law anyway to remove all native iconography at some point. Why should a town like Foxborough be proactive in that? Shouldn't we just wait until the state makes us change it, or why should we do it now?
There's no guarantee the state is going to. We're kind of going back and forth with the state to try to get the state just make this change, make this law, so that we don't have to go to every community and do this. We should be building bridges with communities, not battling with them over changing a name. With towns like Foxborough, we just want people to do the right thing. It could be difficult. Do the right thing, like they choose to do the right thing, not forced on them.
Thinking too.
You can choose to do the right thing, or it can be forced down your throat. And we would rather, the indigenous people would rather the people say, you know what, this is very hurtful to the indigenous population. No matter how much we love it, we have to change it. That's the right thing to do, But if it's forced down their throat, I mean, what kind of growth is that for a town? We see towns like that want to keep it, like they don't care about what happened to the indigenous people. They just don't care. They have no empathy. What kind of human being has no empathy towards another human being? All they care about is themselves. That's really selfish. And America, I thought, came a long way, which we have, because there are a number of communities that see how hurtful it is, how wrong it is, and they change it. They just change it. There's no argument. They change it. But there's some communities that say they vote on it. Well, we're not changing it. That tells us a lot about that community. It tells us that they don't care what happened to the indigenous people. They don't care what happened to another human being. And what kind of life is that to live when you don't have that kind of empathy towards another human being? What kind of growth is that?
Yeah, so the question we're facing as a town is can we look in the mirror and say we want to be better, we want to do the right thing, because we're being told by indigenous peoples almost across the board. I think there are a few outliers. Right. This is the right thing to do. One thing I did want to bring up, because I did a little research this week in preparation for this, is that there's these studies out that's saying that schools with native mascots are psychologically bad, even for non-native students. Do you have any experience with those studies? Have you read about them?
Not with the studies, but I mean, just like common sense can tell, like a thinking human being that uses their brain to think, can understand how children that are raised in this kind of environment where they're kind of mocking another human being, living human being, is teaching that child it's okay.
In the same way, like we were talking briefly before, I was taught Cowboys and Indians was an okay game growing up, and now looking back, that's obviously not something I'd encourage my kids to go out in the yard and play.
and it's like, especially as parents, you should not want your child to have this kind of negative learned behavior, especially in a school where, that's racism in a school. You're kind of mocking another culture, another people. A school should be, they should be the ones to say, I can't believe we didn't see this before. We have to do something about this. This is a civil rights issue, and they're not seeing it. People aren't seeing it that way. They're not seeing it like it's a civil rights issue,
I guess I didn't either until today.
What other race is used as a mascot?
Celtics was the only one I came up with.
But that's what I'm saying. What other race is used as a mascot? There is none. It's just the indigenous people. Why? Because we're trophies. That has to be it. We're viewed as a trophy by the colonist, by the colonizer, and it's racism. And we want school systems to see this racism and prevent it, because no child should have to be exposed to that kind of racism in a school. That's supposed to be a safe place. void of these kind of things. So.
Absolutely. Well, we are out of time for today. Is there any part of this debate that we haven't covered that you think is an important piece of this? I mean, is this your full-time job? Like, are you constantly out here advocating for this across the state? Or do you
not constantly. I mean, I do have a job. This is my responsibility as Sagamore to my people, because they voted to change our indigenous mascots, to get them changed. So that's what our people do.
So your charge as leader is not
Sagamore is to be out here in the community and do what I can for my people and my ancestors. So that's what I do.
But as a volunteer, you're not.
But as a volunteer, yeah, I don't get paid. I'm totally a volunteer. Well, maybe not even a volunteer. It's just, I mean, it's who I am.
It's the right thing to do. Yeah.
It's who I am, you know.
Well, you've brought, I think, a depth to this conversation that I hope to see more of, and that we can, talk a lot more intelligently after this. And I know you've educated me a lot today, so I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your time. I know it was a bit of a drive for you as well. So thanks for making this happen, and I hope we'll keep in touch, and I'll be able to report some good news soon. But again, that's all the time we have for today. But if anyone is interested in discussing this issue any further or appearing on Around Foxborough to discuss the mascot debate in town, we'd love to hear from you. Please email info@fcatv.org and we will be in touch. I want to thank Sagamore Faris Gray for being here today. Thank you to our Executive Director, Michael Weber, Jory Love, our producer, and Fanny Mizarambe, our editor. I've been your host, Jared Craig, and that's it for Around Foxborough this week.